On the mixtape all this week, delighted to be joined in the studio by music icon, I would call him, Phil Harding, the man behind many, many hits of the 80s and 90s, producer, engineer, and part of the, some say, halcyon days of the PWL, the Stock, Aitken and Waterman era. Great to see you, Phil.
Hi, James. Great to be here.
And, of course, local fella.
Yes, living in Bury St Edmunds. Been in this area with our family since 1987, and absolutely love it here in Suffolk. Yeah.
Well, is that Rick Astley money that got you over here?
It was in those crazy days of PWL where we felt the need to escape the craziness of the studios.
Phil Harding, then, what is, for those who don't know, an engineer, a recording engineer? What do you do?
So the recording engineer, the way I was trained in the 70s, is very much the technical person, behind desks as you are here.
Yeah.
That is the conduit between the producer, who's like a film director.
Yeah.
So generally the producer's running the session, and the musicians out in the studio. So the musicians are looking to you to get a great sound for them, for all of their instruments.
Right.
The producer's looking for you to do the same thing, but under
a slightly different remit.
Under his or her direction, because he's not only the producer is not only working for the musicians, but the record companies and managers with a commercial ear on it as well.
Gotcha, yeah. Okay.
So, having trained for 5 years as an engineer, I was really lucky at the Marquee studios to train under some great people. We had Elton John in there mixing albums, and
wow,
it was really quite something. I knew that I wanted to move on to production. Even though I was a musician.
Well, because it's semi-producing anyway, isn't it? Because it's your sound we're hearing. When we hear Rick and Kylie and those songs, it's your sound signature almost.
It is. And you're giving me a wonderful opportunity to play some of those and just give a brief description of a person behind the scene, how you feel that you've stamped some identity.
Your signature on those songs.
Onto that record. Yeah.
A producer, on the other hand, is someone who gives an overview of what they want, and they may have a dabble with an instrument or a computer somewhere, but essentially, you're the guy who brings it all into one half-inch bit of tape.
Going back there.
Back in your day.
Yes, essentially you're correct. More often these days, producers are very talented musicians as well.
Yeah.
I work with a production team now in Bury St Edmunds with two fantastic musicians. Stock and Aitken were fantastic musicians. Waterman was the motivator and driver and the non-musician.
Was he the business head of that
He was
operation?
The business head.
Yeah.
He was the driving force. But it needed co-producers like Stock and Aitken that were fantastic musicians without necessarily having to continually hire musicians in. Public are a lot more aware of it now, as I say, that you get all of these sort of DJ producers, fantastically taking the limelight and really kind of letting people know, we're a creative force behind this record, so our name is on it as well.
We're going to find out a lot more about that creative process and the life of Phil Harding as the week goes by. Song for this Monday, though, Phil, you're going with Toyah, I Want to Be Free. For what? Great song, but for what reason?
Before the days of computers and drum programming and drum machines and all of that, I was taught throughout the 70s. I was engineering by the late 70s. Engineered for The Clash and Killing Joke, and then moved on to working with Toyah and the producer Nick Talbot that was working with her. We just had a hit with It's a Mystery, her first breakthrough.
Yeah.
When she came out of that kind of punk thing. And Nick put this fantastic set of musicians behind her. She already had a guitarist called Joel Bogan, who was her co-songwriter with the music, but he hired in on drums a heavy metal drummer, Nigel Glockler from Saxon.
Right.
He brought in Phil Spalding on bass, who'd played with Mike Oldfield, and Adrian Lee on keyboards, who went on to play with Mike in the Mechanics. Yeah. So it was one of those situations, and as an engineer, I just engineered this record you're about to hear. Yeah. You were judged in the 70s and early 80s on your drum sound.
Yes,
how good is that engineer?
Crucial.
Will we go and work with that engineer?
And that intro that we're about to hear stands out by a mile, doesn't it?
It really, and it stands a test of time for me, which is fantastic, which is why I thought, let's play that, because it was really, we'd come off the hit EP, we were doing a whole album, and it was really something that I've been studying in my PhD, when you reflect back on your work, which you get to a certain age and you've got the chance to do that. And there's this wonderful psychologist called Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who introduced a system called flow in the workplace.
Yeah.
That's a famous book from the early 90s. And what we're about to hear is an example of peak flow for all of these musicians, Toyah's songwriting, Toyah's vocal performance, and my engineering.
That is the wonderful Toyah and the brilliant I Want to Be Free. And it's song choice number 1 of our guest for the mixtape this week, Phil Harding, the man behind 1,000 hits of the late 80s, early 90s and more beside. The mixtape all this week features the music icon Phil Harding. Now, I know that you kind of wince a bit at that, but, you know, this is the man who's been behind so many big, big hits of the last, I guess, 30, possibly even 40 years, as the engineer, as the person who made it sound what it sounded, who stamped his own authority on it, in, of course, cahoots with famously Stock, Aitken and Waterman, but others as well. How did you get that gig with those three? Because presumably in the early days, they were just another 3 music people who were trying to have a hit, right?
Yeah, well, from my point of view, I knew Pete Waterman quite well. I'd been engineering since the late 70s.
Right.
And he managed a producer called Peter Collins, who produced the Nick Kershaw records, things that you play quite a lot.
Oh, yeah.
He was a great pop producer of the early 80s. Yeah. Did some engineering for Pete Collins on Matt Bianco, who he produced as well. and met Pete Waterman as his manager. And when they split up as a partnership and Pete Waterman came together with Stock and Aitken, he decided to come to me. You know, one of the first, I was a house engineer at the Marquee Studios in Soho.
Right.
Pete knew that if he brought this new team in there, that would be a good start-up basis for them. One of the first hit records we had was with Divine, Think You're a Man, Divine.
Oh, yes, of course.
And we created this kind of Pet Shop Boys type of high-energy sound.
And when you think of You Spin Me Round as well,
and
very similar.
That kind of peaked a year later with Spin Me Round with Dead or Alive.
Was it a vision? Did they come together with, we are going to take over the charts, or was it one hit at a time and let's see how it goes?
Not initially. It was a year at the Marquee building up to Spin Me Round.
Right.
And at that point, when that was at number one, after almost a year of working there with them, Pete said, right, this is on a major label, number one single, we've produced the whole album, Youthquake with Dead or Alive.
Yeah.
We've definitely got a future income flow. Let's go and get our own studio. The first day we arrived at PWL Studios, as Pete named it, he said, right, I'm only going to pay one person here. That's Sherry down on reception, and the rest of you are all going freelance.
Well, there you go. So you had to really you were like paid by the hour or something? I mean,
Well, generally by the day.
by the day?
By the day,
on,
really.
on like a day rate?
Yeah, on a day
That's incredible to think of that now.
And but it was just, I had a gut feeling.
Yeah.
Okay,
This is the place to be.
I'm dropping a regular wage, but this is the place to be. This is,
Yeah.
you know, could turn my future into something else. And I think, you know, for all people in all walks of life, but especially in the creative and media industries, I think you've got to recognise sometimes that feeling that when you're in the right place and the right time, but you need to make a choice.
Yes.
And sometimes it can be a tricky choice, and say, yeah, am I ready to make this leap?
It's gut feel often, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a gut feeling.
You
That's
gut
what I call it.
feeling. Yeah. Or going with your heart, I think, is another phrase where you just know something, you know, is looking right.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you ever think to yourself, you know what, I'm going to be talking about these songs in 30 years' time? Did you ever cross your mind?
No, you don't think that way, because at any given time, all you're doing is concentrating on giving your best. And people say, oh, you can spot a hit. I had no idea if this record we're going to play with Rick Astley was okay. It was following up a number of good hits.
Well,
it was
obviously,
the second album.
I mean, he clearly had something. I know the famous story of him being, is it true? Was he a T-boy?
Yeah.
He was a T-boy.
Pete famously says,
Wow.
and I'm sure it was true, it was what we called back in those days a YTS scheme.
Right?
So
I remember those.
He was on a YTS scheme from Warrington, which is where Pete Waterman lived.
Yeah.
And he got something like 6 or 9 months. And for a long time, other than Stock and Aitken, Pete Waterman introduced Rick as the new T-boy to everybody. By which time we had a third studio going down in the sub-basement with a little programming room.
Yeah.
Would you guys spend a bit of time with Rick on his own songs?
And you said, what, the T-boy? You want the T-boy to make a record now?
And then the light bulb went on.
And then, of course, when
and got him behind the mic.
And got him behind the mic.
Wow, you know.
Wow. That voice from
What?
that body?
What?
Yeah.
You know,
Exactly.
a real buzz. Oh, Rick started his second album, fantastic.
Yeah.
By the end of the day, he'd walked out of the building. Now, this is public knowledge. I'm not.
Yeah. No, I'm gripped by it. Yeah.
Imagine the atmosphere in the building, the joy that Rick's back in the studio.
Yeah.
And by the end of the day,
He's gone.
He's gone. He's walked out, and he's refused to sing that song. So then Pete came to myself and Ian and said, "Look, you guys know Rick well. You've worked with him on those tracks on the first album. You helped him initially.
Yeah.
He's got one song that I think could be a first single. Go off to another studio," which we did. We went out of the building to another studio, co-produce it with Rick. That track did end up to be the first single off the album, She Wants to Dance With Me. And then the album went on from there. And to get to the track that you're about to play, the rest of the album was then produced by Stock Aitken Waterman and other producers. And finally, at the end, Pete came back to myself and Ian and said, "Look, Rick's got this other song, Hold Me in Your Arms, and it's a bit of a delicate song. We don't think it'll be a single. You know, you guys did a fantastic job on it. See what you can do." Yeah. So Rick said, "Look, I really want to have just pretty much my vocal without all the harmonies and backing vocals that we normally have on PWL records."
Yeah.
And what we normally did with this microphone is, because it's 4 capsules, it went into a separate technical box which had 2 or 4 outputs that you then had to put into the mixer, that you then had to route mono to the tape machine.
Yeah.
So you're only using up 1 track at a time.
Right.
So it went through this kind of loop of processes that potentially took something away from the sound.
Right.
So I said to Ian and the assistant engineers, I said, look, just for once, we're going to avoid all the stuff in between. We're going to take the stereo signal from the mic, and we're going to get as big and essential a sound on Rick and as natural as possible. And that's what you hear on this record.
They're not multi-tracked then? Rick's not multi-tracked on this song, is he?
A little bit towards the end,
Yeah.
but it's pretty much all single voice.
Wow.
A little bit of double tracking in the chorus, but no big backing vocals and harmonies.
So this is pure Rick?
Yeah, straight onto the mic, straight onto the tape.
We've been trying for a long time to say what we want to say, but feelings don't come easy to express in a simple way. But we all have feelings, we all need loving, and who would be the fool to say that if you hold me in your arms, I won't feel better. If you hold me in your arms, we can brave this storm together. We both know there's a problem that we've got to face. So put your trust in me, lover. No one's ever gonna take your place. 'Cause we all have a problem, we all have fears, but there's always got to be a way. Yes, we all have feelings, we all need loving, and you would be a fool to say that if you hold me in your arms, I won't feel better. If you hold me in your arms, we can brave this storm together. Only have to hold me, touch me, to make me feel so good. You only have to hold me, feel me, to make me feel the way you know I should. Hold me in your arms, hold me in your arms, hold me in your arms, hold me in your arms. When you're gonna hold me in your arms, 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 hold me in
Song choice number 2 from Phil Harding, Rick Astley, Hold Me in Your Arms. The T-Boy made good. Continuing stories from the factory floor, which is the name of his book, ironically, from Phil Harding as the week goes by on the mixtape all this week from BBC Radio. The mixtape all this week features the recording engineer, the producer, the music icon, Phil Harding, who was a huge part of the Stock, Aitken and Waterman process of the late 80s. He was involved prior to that. He's been involved since, and we'll talk about that as the week goes by, and has worked with some of the biggest names in the industry, certainly at that time. We talked yesterday about Rick Astley, and obviously he had his first hit. He was a T-boy initially, had a big hit, and then began to sort of stamp his authority on his music. Were there people who, even though they were queuing up to work with you guys, were difficult to work with, who you struggled with to get a sound out of?
Not really at Peter Wills. You know, as you say, so many people were banging on the door and trying to get in. You know, Simon Cowell in particular. Simon Cowell used to come in. It took possibly a year for Simon Cowell to persuade Stock, Aitken Waterman to work with Sunita. And once he persuaded them, and they started working together, you couldn't get rid of him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, it was. I mean, it's almost a guaranteed hit, wasn't it?
Yeah.
If you could get Stock, Aitken and Waterman to produce your song, then it's a guaranteed hit.
Yeah. If anyone made it difficult, it was Pete Waterman himself.
Right.
Being this really strong-minded driver, captain of the ship, motivator.
Yeah.
And
who has the final say then? When you play a mix, who says good or bad, send it to press?
Pete Waterman.
It was Pete all the time.
Everything started and ended with Pete Waterman.
Right.
And this is one of the things I've reflected on in my PhD and in my forthcoming book, Pop Music Production. You could not get anything out of PW. You couldn't go in at the weekend and do something with Banana Armour and slip it to London Records without Pete knowing.
Without Pete knowing,
because
right.
if you did, you were risking your position at the studio.
Yeah, so he was completely, not micromanaging, he was totally managing the entire operation.
Yeah, and that's not to say for external clients that weren't necessarily a Stock, Aitken Waterman production, let's say, but anything PWL, anything on PWL Records, any of their productions started with him and finished with him.
And would he ever say to you, this, just start again? This is not happening, we don't like this, start again?
Yeah.
He would say
more than
that?
once, yeah.
Oh, wow.
People wouldn't really argue. People would try and work out...
Well, how do you argue with that? That's the thing, isn't it?
Well, what is it that's not working for you, Pete? What do we need to change? Yeah. And the team would work towards his vision and that goal of pleasing him.
What was the secret of success? Because I've got a couple of theories, and tell me if I'm right or wrong. First of all, they were very radio friendly, and when I say radio friendly, great start, great intro. They sounded right. They weren't overly compressed. The quality was great. They were catchy. They were the right duration, so they got a lot of airplay. And secondly, talking of compression, I think that was another factor, that there was the beginnings of songs really being highly polished and produced with that wonderful compressive sound on it.
There was a formula. I mean, if you were to play 10 Stock, Aitken Waterman hits in a row, you'd soon work out...
You'd pick out the similarities.
Yeah, you'd soon say, well, the intros are all from the musicality of the chorus, and often they'll have some of the chorus vocals in it. Yeah. Quite often, to satisfy Pete Waterman's desire that a chorus should always lift, and by the way, a chorus has always got to hit by a minute.
Right.
So he'd be looking at his watch. The chorus doesn't hit by a minute.
Oh, that's wow.
Then we've got to change something.
So get into the chorus by a minute, or
get into the chorus by a minute, and a lift always into the chorus, which quite often, cleverly, Stock and Aitken would achieve by a key change. Yeah. So there's a number of tracks you could pick out if you were sitting at a musical keyboard and say, "Oh, hello, we've changed key in the chorus. Yes, it's gone up."
So it's feel good as much as anything, and I don't think there's a better example of that than Donna Summer, This Time I Know It's For Real.
Yeah.
It just lifts you all the way through.
Yeah.
How do you attract, as an aspiring musician, how crucial and how do you attract the top producers?
Well, pretty much always a producer's got to want to work with you.
Right.
Especially a producer with a certain reputation.
Yeah.
And it's little known, really, that the top producers and the top songwriters have all got their own managers. And there's a whole world of specialist producer-songwriter managers, well as artist managers.
Yeah, and they don't come cheap.
No, and they are in that position to field what the next projects are.
Right.
So when we moved on to the 90s, knowing, having left PWL, knowing that we needed a good manager, myself and Ian Kerno, to get ourselves going at a new studio, and to get the right projects chosen, we chose a guy called Tom Watkins, who was an artist manager. He had managed the Pet Shop Boys and Bros.
Yeah.
He just signed E17, but he was looking to also manage producers. So we were early in the early 90s with Tom Watkins and E17, and by the time we'd had quite a few hits with E17, Tom Watkins is fielding off all of these other people that want to work with us.
Wow.
So that's kind of how it happens. And when we finally stopped working with Tom, we got a phone call from Louis Walsh,
as you do,
who had been refused access to us by Tom Watkins.
Right.
Saying, I've been trying to get you guys to work with Boyzone for a year now.
I see. So
and Tom Watkins wouldn't allow me to talk to you.
So that freed you up.
That's freed us up to move on to working with Boyzone.
For Boyzone. Song choice for this Wednesday, we are going to be going with Phil. Katie Lang, Constant Craving. Yeah, now for what reason?
We fell into this situation, as I just said, with Tom Watkins. We almost kind of fell into this boy band genre.
Yeah.
By having early success with E17, with their first single, House of Love. By the end of the 90s, Ian Kerr and I had been pigeonholed by the rest of the industry.
Right.
They've had success with E17, success with Boyzone.
So that's what they do.
So that's what they do.
They can't do anything else.
And we never got offered any female artists. 7 or 8 years.
Despite Donna Summer, Kylie, and
despite everything else.
Goodness knows what all else. Wow.
You know, that's the way the industry works sometimes. Yeah. So, for my listening pleasure away from work, I was craving female voices. And I got into this routine in the 90s of everything I listened to for fun and for pleasure were female artists like Katie Lang, Joni Mitchell's making some great albums in the 90s.
Yeah.
You name any of those 90s singer-songwriter females, and that's what I would listen to as an escape from constant boy bands.
Can you listen to a record without hearing what microphone settings, what mixer settings, what EQ, what compression they've got? Can you listen just as a listener?
I can again now, because I'm not working as hard.
Yeah.
But throughout the 80s and 90s, no. It's a constant... And I often say to students, if you get to that stage, don't feel bad about it.
Yeah.
Because when you get to the stage of production, sound-wise, dissecting everything you listen to... Yeah. That's when you are seriously in the music industry.
I do it with radio. I cannot listen to a radio station without, picking things to bits. Yeah. This is the wonderful Katie Lang and Constant Craving. Katie Lang, Constant Craving, song choice number 3 from Phil Harding. Back with us tomorrow, same time, for more on his mixtape. The mixtape all this week featuring Phil Harding, now living in Bury St Edmunds, a huge part of the music industry, certainly 70s, 80s, 90s, and still to this day. Phil, you've got a book out as well. And now this is not the first, because you have released work as the years have gone by. Certainly some of the remix CDs, which have been a huge
That's right.
popularity with me, at least, anyway. And now the book, Pop Music Production.
Yes, so I did a memoir book of my time at PWL in the 1980s.
Yeah.
That was called PWL from the Factory Floor.
That was great. I loved that.
Thank you, James.
And I loved, because didn't you not do an slightly extended version with some technicals in it?
Yes.
I loved that.
Yes, broke down all the mixes.
Yeah.
And, the aim of that was to give a different view to readers of the way Pete Waterman had described it in his autobiography, and Mike Stock had a book out called The Hit Factory, and it was very much, they were views from the top.
From above,
yeah,
you want it from the floor.
So I tried to give exactly, as part of the team. And obviously I moved on to fantastic boy band and manufactured pop success in the 90s with my partner Ian Kerno at the Strongroom studios, and I was invited by Leeds Beckett University, because I've got quite involved in education in the last 20 years, to come and do a PhD by portfolio. It's a full PhD, but they allow you to take parts of your creative portfolio works.
Oh, wow.
And put that into the into the work.
Because I was going to ask you about that. Well, why would you need to get a PhD? But if you're allowed to bring your previous experience and work into play, that makes perfect sense. Yeah,
and I've been chair and co-chair of an organisation called James, Joint Audio Media Education Services.
Oh, I love that.
who are part of the Music Producers Guild.
Yeah.
And our motto is to try and link industry and education. And as we all know, there's been a lot of criticism of creative degrees and media degrees at universities, but as far as we're concerned in the industry, we want to see it happen, and we want to support that.
Famously, people joke about the media studies degree as being worthless. That's not the case, though, is it?
No, almost every college and university around the UK are running some sort of music technology, music production type of course or degree.
Yeah, 2 of my children have got that degree, and they're both in very lucrative work now.
Yes, a lot, a lot of people do. They don't necessarily go the exact route I've been. So, having been invited to do that and being in that kind of industry education position, I felt that it would be good to, because sometimes when I turn up to places for lectures, some of the academics can sort of, it's another industry person coming in to talk.
Yeah.
Has the attitude changed since I've been Dr. Phil Harding? Probably not.
Right. But you are at least now Dr. Phil Harding.
What it has allowed me to do, and I go to a couple of academic music production conferences around the world, and it's allowed me to turn my PhD, which was about the manufactured pop and boy bands of the 1990s, believe it or not, into this new book, Pop Music Production. And it's with an academic publisher, which is what I wanted to do. So it's still a bit of a memoir about what happened in the 90s. But it's educative. But it's designed as a study book for students and lecturers in the future.
Final set of questions for Phil Harding, then, that we ask each and every one of our guests. And we might slightly adapt it for you, Phil. We'll see. Your all-time favourite word?
Love.
Your least favourite word?
Hate.
Your obviously, your best quality?
Generosity, I'd like to think.
Good for you. And your worst quality?
Stubbornness.
Stubbornness?
So my wife tells me.
You got to have that. Okay. Now, this will be interesting. A sound or noise that you love?
Well, nothing to do with music. I did think about that, but no, I love the sound of children playing.
A lot of people say that.
Really?
There is no sound like it, right?
Yeah, it's great.
And a sound or noise that you hate?
Well, it's got to be sirens, I'm afraid. Police, and I know they're all doing a good job, but I just hate hearing it.
So often as well.
It's just,
make you jump. They remind you that nastiness is going on somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay. The best vocalist you've ever worked with?
Oh, you rotter.
I know. That's not on our list. I'm going to sneak that one in. The best vocalist you've ever worked with, in terms of pure raw talent?
Well, there's a couple I could home in on, but I'd probably fall back on Rick Astley.
Would you really?
I really would. But having said that, working with someone like Pete Burns from Dead or Alive was an experience. I mean, Rick was a natural, quite, as we all thought when he first appeared on the scene, where that voice came from. Yeah. We don't know. It wasn't...
But he wasn't a natural star, was he? He was a natural vocalist, but he didn't really like the star world.
He had a love of soul music. You can hear the soul, and although one could say, well, his records weren't soulful, well, some were.
Yeah.
You know, you can hear that soul influence. But Pete Burns from Dead or Alive was just another world. There was him and the singer from Nights Are Ebb, who had no concept of rehearsal, practicing, or give me a technical run for level.
Yeah.
You'd put the mic up, they'd know what they're singing and going for, and lo behold, if you weren't technically ready to be blasted, because they only had one way of doing it, and that was a 100% performance every time.
Every single time, yeah.
And it was incredible to witness.
Yeah, no, I'm delighted to hear it from Rick, because, it's easy to think he was just... Well, a T-boy, but there was some real talent there. Yeah. And if heaven exists, Phil, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Welcome, my son. You've been a very good boy.
All hope, isn't it? Yeah. Phil Harding, the book is out soon. Is it out now, Phil? Pop music production?
It's out in July.
And July.
And if people did want to order
July,
it,
so it's out now.
Sorry, July 19th.
July 19th.
And it's can I say it's www.routledge.com.
Yeah.
That's ROUTLEDGE.
Yeah.
And pop music production. And if you use the code HUM capitals 19. You'll get a 20% discount.
Oh, hello. HUM19. And that's the discount code right here on this show where we'll get you 20% off that book. Lovely. There you go. HUM19. Phil Harding, final song choice. And I don't know if this will surprise people, but Damien Rice Cannonball. For what reason?
I think once I sort of stopped doing the boy band thing, literally the end of 1999, we closed down our studio in London, over-soaked my hearing on wonderful female vocal throughout the 90s, as I was saying yesterday, and I've always mainly kind of been a keyboard player or a bass player as a musician, not very good. And I started playing, when I had a bit more time, acoustic guitar in my local church in Bury St Edmunds.
Right, yeah.
The Catholic St Edmunds Church. I got this real sort of enthusiasm and a little bit of ability to play acoustic guitar quite well.
Wow.
And started writing some new songs around the guitar. I was trying to be Damien Rice, I suppose. His first album was an amazing breakthrough.
Yeah.
His second album is fantastic. And his latest album, it's a year or two old now, My Favourite Faded Fantasy. I thought if I get James to play one of these, they all last 6, 7 or 8 minutes. There's not a bad song on there. They're all classics in my view. So I thought, well, we better go with Cannonball because it's...
There you go, understanding radio again, you see.
Exactly.
Spot on.
People will recognise it, and it's a wonderful track.
Great stuff. Phil, great to see you.
There's still a little bit of your taste in my mouth. There's still a little bit of you laced with my doubt. It's still a little hard to say what's going on. There's still a little bit of your ghost, your weakness. There's still a little bit of your face I haven't kissed. You step a little closer each day that I can't say what's going on. Stones taught me to fly. Love, it taught me to lie. Life, it taught me to die. So it's not hard to fall when you flow like a cannon. Oh, there's still a little bit of your song in my ear. There's still a little bit of your words I don't want to lose. It's not hard to grow. You know that you just don't know. Stones taught me to fly. Love taught me to lie. Life taught me to die. So it's not hard to fall when you float like a cannon. Stones taught me to fly. And love just taught me to cry. So come on, courage, teach me to be shy. 'Cause it's not hard to fall when you float like a cannonball.
Damien Rice, Cannonball, final choice of tune from Phil Harding on the mixtape. Delighted to catch up with Phil all this week. The book is out and is, like all Phil's work, is a very fascinating read.